Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another exciting adventure in the ATL Session 2 Recap and Session 3 Preview. Alright, just joking around, trying to get your attention. I'm going to try to make this short and sweet and just really try to sum up the big ideas from Session 1 and 2 and how it relates to what we're going to be talking about in Session 3. Alright, we all remember Fink's integrated course design model. It's so simple, but it's really descriptive too, and so I want to make sure every week we go back to this and really think about all the big ideas that we've covered in each part of this model. So let's start with situational factors. At the most basic level, there were three questions we asked. One, what do we need to know about ourselves as instructors, right? TPI, teaching goals. What do we want students to know about ourselves? That's when we decide, hey, what's going to be relevant to them? What's going to help build rapport with them? And then number three, what do we need to know about our students, right? So that we can engage them holistically, just like Mark Francic showed us how he engages his students holistically. And so that's really where that self-authorship piece comes in, the learning partnerships model. And we're going to talk about how that relates to Session 3, or teaching and learning activities. Now, specifically, when we think about teaching and learning activities, we really want to think about Cobb's experiential learning cycle, right? Because according to science and research, it shows that this is kind of the way the brain takes in information and kind of makes sense out of it. It's really kind of the scientific method if you really think about how this all works. So how do we really use this information learned in the readings to engage students in valuable class time and essentially walk them through Cobb's experiential learning cycle, whether it's just for a couple seconds, whether it's over the period of a whole class period, or maybe it's just over the entire semester. Remember, Zoll made a really good point. He said that the nice thing about this cycle is it could happen in seconds, it could happen in minutes, you could have multiple different learning cycles at once. It's really a fantastic thing, and it's just a continual cycle that keeps going and going. So how do we do that effectively in the classroom? Let's talk about what this could look like, okay? So the experience portion is really, if we relate to the learning partnerships model, that's the situating learning in the learner's experience, right? So some questions to ask yourself about the experiences, right? What is the best way to expose students to the content? Think back to how Francic did it, right? Is it Hollywood movies? Is it getting active? Is it music? Is it candy? Who knows? But either way, I really like how Bowen sets up this idea of the first exposure. And one of the best ways to alleviate time when you're trying to ask this question is, has someone already done this for me? If someone has an experience for you, fantastic. Use that experience, Let's borrow stuff. Let's give credit to people. Let's use what's going to give students the best experience while they're engaging in your content. And then you ask yourself, is this something that can be covered before class? I mean, that's really what you have to decide. But regardless, Fink's done a great job of setting up just a really simple example of how we can really keep the learning cycle going throughout the class semester, right? So it's not just these separate events, but everything links together, everything we discuss, and you keep these learning cycles going. Well, in order to do that, there's got to be some reflective observation, right? We have to hold students accountable to actually reflect on the experience and not just consume it. So this is the defining learning as mutually constructed part of the learning partnerships model. Now we ask students to really engage in these ideas and reflect on them and try to make sense out of them. So the question that you want to ask yourself not only is how do we hold students accountable, but what active learning strategies are going to work best for you given your situational factor. Now keep in mind that this is really the active learning component, right? And Fink does a great job of really offering just some ways that we can have experiences, right? And think back to Mark Francic's talk. He gave us a lot of different ideas about the experience for the student. And then here are just a few ways that you can kind of get the reflective dialogue going, whether it's just a simple think, pair, share, or maybe it's actual group work. I mean, it really depends on you. Maybe it's journaling, but there are so many options here, and I want you to think about what the best way is for you to get students to reflect. All right, after they've reflected, now they actually have to make sense out of it, right? And so if we want to validate learners as knowers, we need to help them understand how to make deductions, draw conclusions, or make hypotheses about what will happen. My physics teacher in high school made me in love with physics because he gave us these really challenging questions, and he would really he wouldn't demand, but he would encourage us to think about what would happen, He would give us unique examples using Superman, using Batman, using these examples we're all familiar with, and really ask us, hey, what's going to happen if Superman is trying to save Lois Lane and she's falling from a bridge, What's going to happen? Like, what does physics say is going to happen? Well, the question is, and this is the challenge, right? How do we change the learner from a receiver to a producer? Well, I think it really stems back from the idea of engaging them in an exciting experience and getting them to reflect on it in their own life. And if you can do those first two steps, then I think this abstract conceptualization really works nicely. It just makes sense to them. They start saying, hey, how can I use this in my life? Now, the act of experimentation is tough, right? If we want to continue to validate learners as knowers, we really have to ask ourselves, how do we give opportunities to students to really test these ideas, right? Okay, we can't necessarily throw people off a bridge and then try to fly down and catch them, like the physics example, right? But in my class, when we talk about conflict, this is something that's really important, right? How do I get students to really test out these ideas that we discussed in conflict, to help them see conflict as something that is positive? Is it an assessment of some type? Is it a set of assessments? We'll talk about this more in session 4, because I think the active experimentation is where we give students opportunities to kind of go out in the field and kind of experiment. But if we're going to give them opportunities to experiment, we also have to offer feedback, which is a great preview for the assessment section, which is actually coming in our next time that we meet. However, for right now, the biggest thing that I want you to keep in mind is this is a lot of information, and what I'm trying to do is just make sense out of it for you so that as you experience all these different things and you reflect on the big ideas that we discussed, you can now begin to think about how do you start using this information and apply it to things like your teaching and learning activities. Do you decide to keep things covered in class? Do you want to think about out-of-class assignments that link the classes together? Are you offering time for students to reflect? All these things are really important to think about. And we're going to talk about this in great detail. In fact, we got some great faculty who are coming on Friday to help engage us in kind of how they engage their students. And hopefully we'll have some time to do some hypothesizing of how we can do this in our classes as well. All right, I hope this was short and sweet like a Rice Krispie treat for you, and I can't wait to see you all on Friday. Goodbye now.